My 38M stay-at-home wife, 40F, has been treating our son, 12M, poorly and favoring our daughter, 9F, ever since I complimented his cooking. How should I handle this? My wife has always been the one to cook around the house, and as an Italian, it's one of the reasons I fell so hard for her. I've offered to help out in the kitchen or even cook for her sometimes, but she's always firmly yet politely said no, and I can't really blame her because I did not get either of my parents' good cooking genes. Because of this, I've always made sure to thank her for every meal, and I've taught my children to do the same. For the past year or so, my son has been watching many cooking videos on YouTube and TikTok, and he's really been wanting to try his hand at cooking. My wife was happy to teach him, and at least twice a week, the two of them head to the store, buy ingredients for a meal he found on TikTok, and come home to make it. It's been fantastic seeing them bond more, since they haven't really had much overlap in interests before this. About a month ago, after dinner, my son asked his mom if he could try making us all a meal on his own. I said it sounded like a great idea, and she hemmed and hawed for a while before agreeing. So that Saturday, she took him to the store to get his ingredients, and then he got to work. She supervised here and there, but he insisted that she didn't need to. So eventually, she came to the living room and sat with my daughter and me, looking a little bit dejected. I reassured her that I was sure he'll still want to cook with her. He just wanted to try it out on his own. That seemed to help a little, but she still seemed somewhat off. When he finished, and we all sat down to eat, I was honestly surprised at just how well he managed on his own. I feel bad saying it, but even after a year or so of cooking with his mother, I expected him to mess up more than he did. I wanted to encourage this interest of his, so I made sure to let him know while I was eating how well he did, and gently mentioned the few mistakes he had made. I praised him much more than I typically would with my wife's cooking, and in hindsight, I can see that's what started all of this. His sister, being his little sister, wasn't as supportive as I was and quite rudely insulted his cooking. I was going to tell her to mind her manners and be grateful that he cooked for us when my wife made a sound and pushed her plate away, before agreeing and saying it was too salty and overcooked. This took me aback, and I could tell my son took it hard too, as his mood visibly dropped. I didn't say anything at the time since my wife and I never argue in front of the kids, and I just kept up the praise of my son's cooking as his mother picked at the plate for a bit longer before she took her and our daughter's plates to the kitchen. A little while later, I went to check on my son, and I could tell he had been crying, so I comforted him, telling him I was sure his mother loved the food and that she was probably just having a bad day. He shouldn't take it personally. Then later, once the kids were asleep, I confronted her about it, and she tried to brush it off, but I insisted, and she got mad and said that I complimented his cooking far more than I ever complimented hers. This caught me off guard, since I didn't expect my wife to be jealous of our son, and I unfortunately let out an involuntary scoff at this. She blew up at me for laughing, and we ended up arguing for a while before eventually I managed to explain that I was complimenting him so much because I wanted to encourage him to keep cooking, and she even admitted that she shouldn't have been so harsh about it. She said she would apologize to him, and I figured that everything was settled. That Monday, when I was driving my son to school, I noticed he wasn't acting normally, looking out the window and trying to hide his face from me. I asked him what was wrong, and he told me he was fine, but I could tell he was holding back tears. So, I asked him again, and he broke down and told me that after I had left to get the car started, she told him she would be cooking alone again from now on. I was furious about this, but I kept my cool and told him I would talk to her about it. I bought him a snack from the store before dropping him off at school. I left work early so I could get home before the kids and talk to my wife. I'll admit I didn't handle it as well as I could have, and we ended up in a shouting match where I called her childish for being so vindictive towards our son because she was upset with me, and she called him a baby and said he shouldn't be so sad about not being allowed to cook since it wasn't a man's job anyway. We ended up leaving each other alone to cool down, and when our kids got home, my wife took our daughter out and came back later with a load of toys and clothes for her. I knew immediately what she was trying to do, and that night I told her that I would not let her use the money I make for our family to punish my son. She didn't take this well, and we ended up arguing again. I slept in the guest room and have been up to this point. For this past month, my wife has kept up this vindictive showering of our daughter with attention and gifts while almost entirely ignoring my son. I've been talking to my parents and brother about this, and while they agree that she's wrong, they also don't view it as that big of a problem and think it'll sort itself out. At this point, with how she's been treating our son, I'm beginning to fall out of love with her, but I also don't want to jump to divorce if there's something I can do to fix this whole situation. I can honestly say that we've never had a fight this big. Sure, we argue every now and then, but she's never taken it out on my son before. I feel responsible and guilty about what happened, and I've been trying to do nice things for my son when I can. However, I also don't want to mirror my wife's behavior, so I've also been taking my daughter with us about half the time we go places. But whenever we do, she's been very rude and always talks about all the things her mother does for her lately, because she knows it bothers her brother. Seeing the way my wife has been treating our son has made me second guess our marriage, but I don't want to just jump straight to divorce either. Any advice on what I should do or how to best bring up the topic of therapy therapy would be appreciated. Relevant comments. OOP on having conversations with his wife about their son's feelings, and OOP's concerns on her behaviors. OOP, thank you very much. I've tried talking with her about the whole situation multiple times, but she's very quick to dismiss me and my concerns, so hopefully, using some of these ideas you've given me can help. Quite frankly, the whole cooking is a woman's job thing really blew my mind since she's never said anything like that before, and even used to fight with her mother about those kinds of comments when Mill would make them about our daughter and nieces. I'm unsure if she genuinely feels that way or was just pulling things out of the air in the heat of the moment. Oop, on taking other routes before deciding on the divorce. Oop, I want to at least give counseling a fair shot before I pull that trigger. This has legitimately been the first time she's ever shown this kind of attitude, so I want to give her a chance to see the error of her ways. That being said, if she's unwilling to even try counseling, then yes, my next step will be filing for divorce. OOP on having his son staying somewhere else instead of his wife. OOP, I understand this, and I've already weighed the pros and cons. Letting him stay at someone else's house isn't going to help much in this situation. He's not going to suddenly forget how his mother has been acting toward him just because he's under a different roof. I don't believe that removing him from his home and room where all his belongings are is worth the potential benefits, especially when it might seem to him like I'm simply removing him from the house so that things will be easier around here. It's not like he's stuck at home 24/7. He's very social, and he's been spending a lot of time hanging out with friends or sleeping over. He's had time away from his mother, and he hasn't seemed hesitant to come home at all. Oops, thoughts on if his wife resents their son so much after his love for cooking started? Oop, that's what's really been sticking with me the most. I don't understand why she's been acting this way. She's always had a very strong maternal instinct and didn't go through PPD with either of our children, which was surprising to me because both of our mothers went through it with all their children. Not that it's genetic or anything, but I was just expecting it from experience. I hate to sound misogynistic, but I've considered that it could be the beginnings of menopause even though she's still young. The biggest thing that's been on my mind is if it's something I did. I added the little spiel at the beginning about always complimenting her because it's something I've been thinking about nonstop. I never pressured her into being a Sam. We fully planned on having her go back to work after my son was born, but she changed her mind almost immediately after she gave birth. I do my fair share of the chores around the house. I always wash the dishes, take care of the lawn, and we both clean up around the house. I never hold it against her that she doesn't work or withhold money from her. I felt awful after I told her that she's using my money to punish our son because it just seemed like I was being unfair. I'd almost prefer if it was something I did so that I could just blame it on myself instead of having to accept that my wife is capable of doing this kind of thing on her own. Update. Obligatory, but genuine. Thank you for all the support. Even the comments that got a bit nasty. That kind of pushback helped me to see that things were a lot worse than I realized. Some of you could do with being a bit nicer, but the advice is appreciated all the same. Short recap. My wife and son cooked dinner together most nights for about a year. My son wanted to try cooking dinner on his own, which my wife accepted, but she started acting funny. She ended up rudely criticizing his meal. Then the next day she told him that she would do the cooking on her own from then on. After I confronted her about this, she started neglecting, emotionally abusing him while shoveling positivity onto our daughter. The first thing I did after making my previous post was take my son to my parents' house to tell them what was happening from his perspective. I figured they might be more receptive to seeing the pain their grandson was going through and not just write it off like they had with me. They ended up understanding and supportive of my next move, which was kicking my wife out until she worked through whatever problem she was going through. Next, I went to a lawyer and consulted with him. He told me it would be best to have the papers ready to go, even if I wasn't sure I wanted the divorce yet, because it's better to get it done as quickly as possible if I decided to go through with it. In Canada, you have to either separate for a year or prove abuse or adultery. I took the kids to my folks' house the next Saturday and came back with my mother. I let her talk with my wife first. Then, when they were finished, I told her that I needed her to leave the house until she figured out what was causing her to act this way toward our son. She, surprisingly, agreed. I'm guessing hearing things from my mother knocked some sense into her, as they were always close. I told her that my parents were willing to let her stay there during that time because her parents lived too far away, or I could put her up in a nearby motel. I also offered to pay for her to see a therapist every week, which I told her was essential for fixing things. Our kids spent the night with my parents, and we moved her out the next day. We both sat with the kids and told them what was happening. Our son understood, but our daughter didn't, and was quite upset. Eventually, we calmed her down. Things went well for the first month or so. She attended all the weekly appointments, and I met her for dinner a few nights a week with the kids, and she seemed to be treating our son properly again. I was really hopeful she was making progress. Then, the Friday after her 5th therapy appointment, she sent me a wall of text messages about how I was an asshole and trying to steal her children from her, and how I was probably fucking someone on the side. I attempted to call her to see what she was talking about, but I think she turned off her phone. I called my mother, and she informed me that my wife had left the house earlier that day with all her stuff without saying anything to my mom. I'm not 100% sure what happened. happen next, as my wife refuses to tell me most details, and I can't get in contact with the friends she was with. The best I can piece together is that she told her best friend about what was happening, and that friend started telling her all about how I was just trying to kick her out and steal her kids. She then moved in with her friend and went on a week-long bender of clubbing, drinking, and drugs. When we were younger, we did our fair share of stupid shit together, so while this was surprising, it was most likely her dumbass friends convincing her to relive the good old days. I hadn't heard anything for about a week. Then, I got a text from her friend telling me I was a loser, that my wife was too good for me, and that she was fucking a younger guy. I tried to demand she give my wife the phone so I could talk with her, but I never got a reply. I screenshotted the texts for evidence if I needed it. I ended up getting a call from the hospital at like 3 in the morning that Sunday. My wife had overdosed on something and was dropped off at the ER by someone who didn't stick around. Since I was her emergency contact, they reached out to me. I called my mom to come watch the kids and headed over there. They managed to get her stabilized and were treating her. I stuck around for a few hours, and she was in and out of consciousness. And when she wasn't very talkative. When she properly woke up, she started apologizing for everything, and that's when I found out the few details I know about her friend and the bender. I asked her if she had been fucking someone else like her friend said, and she didn't reply, which was as much of an answer as I needed. She kept trying to apologize, and I just kept my cool and told her this wasn't the time or place for this. We ended up leaving at about 8 a.m. the next day. I got her back to my parents' place, got her into bed, and just before I left, I put the papers on the table beside the bed and told her that I expected her to sign them within a week, and that I had proof she cheated on me during her bender. I had told my parents I was planning on doing this on the phone, so I wasn't just dumping this drama on them without warning. The kids are both doing fine. They don't know anything about what happened with their mother or the divorce. All they know is that my wife has moved out and that she is busy getting better, so we're not going to be seeing her as much. I'll probably tell them in a couple of weeks when school lets out for the summer, so it doesn't affect their learning. Over the next couple of weeks, I've received countless calls from her, ranging from begging for a second chance to screaming that she hated me and was going to make my life hell. She went back and forth every day. I've also been getting vitriolic texts from her family and friends, calling me all sorts of names and threatening that if I don't drop the divorce, I'll regret it. All of this has been screenshotted. My parents agree that divorce is for the best, but they're questioning my timing and wondering if I should have chosen a better time than when she was fresh out of the hospital. I'm 100% sure I want her out of my life, and I plan on going for full custody of my children, as I don't want them around my wife if this behavior is what she's willing to stoop to. And while I do want it done as soon as possible, I'm wondering if I should take back the papers and tell her I've changed my mind, at least until she's a bit more stable. ETA. I saw comments suggesting I take my kids to therapy to explain the situation to them. I have a session set up with a therapist in a week. I just wanted to wait a little longer for their school to be as finished as possible. I forgot to include it when I first typed everything out. Relevant comments. Miss Stirk, absolutely do not take back the papers. Your marriage is over and she killed it. She needs to take accountability for what she did, and you are trying to let her off the hook. IMO. I would advise your lawyer about what's going on and listen to and follow the advice given. You should be filing for full custody, IMO. You can always loosen restrictions later. Oop. Yeah, after I served her the papers, I got in contact with him again and have been telling him everything that has been happening. He has every text screenshot I've collected so far, and I'm updating him with any developments. I appreciate the advice still. Tropics and caffeine. Be careful of her family contacting your kids. They may try to poison their minds against you. Oop. Neither of my children have accounts on messaging apps. My son has an old phone of mine that isn't activated. It's just a TikTok device at this point, and my daughter only has access to a tablet for an hour or two after school, and similarly has no messaging apps on it. The only way they'd be able to contact them is by coming here or stopping by the school. But I've contacted the school admins and let them know that I'm to be the only one picking them up. When their mom first left the house, I had to enroll them in a before and after school program, as I can't pick them up right when school is let out, and the ladies that run it have been made aware as well. I'm doing everything I can think of to protect my kids. OOP on speaking with his lawyer about the possibility of having temporary emergency order to keep his children safe from their mother. OOP. I brought it up to my lawyer and I'm still considering it, but he said it's not likely to be granted, and we don't have anything to prove she's a threat to the children. Her threats of making my life hell were never recorded, so I can't prove she said it, and she hasn't said it since I started recording. Plus, it's been her friends, and we can't put that on her without proof she's telling them to do it. I've taken the precautions I need to. I've contacted the school and told them that I'm the only one allowed to pull them out of class no matter what. Also, the before and after school program I put them in when I removed my wife from our home has been told that I'm the only one allowed to pick them up. Trust me, if I get her on tape threatening me, I will push for a protective order. OP responds to the question of whether his wife's parents are aware of the situation. OP. Well, her parents have actually been relatively civil about it. They were obviously upset when they first heard, but I explained it to them, and they understand. They've been checking in on the kids and have asked if they need anything. thing. It's really the rest of her family doing it, and I just don't have the energy to argue with that many people, so I've been blocking them after getting my screenshots. OP was asked if his children are not likely to be his, and the possibility that his wife has cheated on him. OP, the kids are definitely mine. Both of them, at 2 years old, looked exactly like I do in pictures of me at that age. I have no question about that, and I have gotten an STI check, and I'm clean. I don't suspect this cheating was a long-time thing. She's acting too ashamed of it for it to have been something she's been doing for years. I think she was just drunk and high and gave in to her moronic friend's idea to get back at me for kicking her out.